What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with FantasyPros, and let's talk about 8 running backs that you should not draft in 2023. But before we get started, if you want a chance to win a one-of-one ultimate custom fantasy championship belt for your league, courtesy of Trophy Smack, the #1 destination for epic fantasy tournament trophies, you need to subscribe to FantasyPros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video, and that's it. We will be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Now let's dive right in. We will start off with low ADP and then work our way up to the high-end running backs and keep the list of players being drafted in single-digit rounds. First up, we'll talk about Khalil Herbert. This one might ruffle some feathers because his ADP is fine and he's a popular sleeper pick. There is very little risk associated with drafting him, and unless something goes catastrophically wrong, he'll finish around or slightly above his ADP. In past games where David Montgomery was injured, we saw strong performances from Herbert. Visually, he looked great, and statistically, he was good in terms of yards per carry. So why is Khalil Herbert on my do not draft list? My big problem with Khalil Herbert and why I will not be drafting him is that he offers very little upside. You could opt for a running back being drafted around him like Antonio Gibson, who has legitimate RB1 capabilities and has receiving upside. You could go with a player like Zach Charbonnet, who also offers a diverse skill set, more suitable for PPR, and has 3-down back capabilities. A running back doesn't have to have receiving upside to thrive, but that does mean that he needs to have a strong baseline for touchdowns. Unfortunately for Herbert, playing with Justin Fields makes him a touchdown liability. So we are talking about a running back that will share some workload with Donta Foreman, has no receiving upside, and has arguably the best running quarterback in the league. Players being drafted around Herbert just have more upside. I don't think Herbert can finish within the top 20. I would rather take a gamble in this ADP range rather than play it safe. Brian Robinson is another running back primarily used on the ground in a committee, and much like Khalil Herbert, his ADP isn't actually bad. But again, drafting a guy at RB34 for him to have a ceiling of a low-end RB2 just isn't going to win fantasy leagues. It's safe, but it's not a league-winning move. You're better off drafting a running back around him with a higher ceiling. Cutting Robinson's season where he actually played and looking at his performance versus other backs over that time period last year, Robinson was RB25 in his active games, averaging 9.2 fantasy points per game in PPR. Without touchdowns, he just struggles to be productive. Now, it's very possible Washington's offense will move better this season and Robinson could have more goal line opportunities. But Sam Howell is a mobile quarterback, and he could easily cut into that opportunity. There's no question Robinson is the early down back here, but drafting a guy to get me 24 carries for 87 yards is just underwhelming. Shoot for upside and pass on Robinson. Moving on to the next player, let's talk about Dalvin Cook. At this point, there are very few scenarios where Dalvin Cook could actually finish as an RB1, and RB2 might be difficult as well. We seem extremely close to Dalvin Cook landing with the Jets, but rumors are that they just aren't on the same page in terms of contract length and pay. At this point, we're just waiting on pins and needles to figure out where he's going to land and know what his actual upside is. If Cook did sign with the Jets, he could be a lead back for a short period of time. It would give the Jets time to let Breece Hall heal and ease him back in, but once Hall is back, it's not hard to guess how this workload would be split. They would share early down work and Hall would dominate the receiving work. It's difficult to envision a scenario where Cook is more than a low-end RB2 with the Jets. The best case scenario would be Miami, but this also seems like the least likely landing spot between the top choices. If Miami calls, we can feel more comfortable with drafting Cook. But if not, we're drafting a guy as a low-end RB2 whose best case scenario is in fact a low-end RB2. And when you look at the talent at other positions being drafted around Cook's ADP, there's just no reason to draft Cook unless we get some kind of indication that Miami is back on the table. Let's talk about another player being drafted within a potential committee, Kenneth Walker. Avoiding Kenneth Walker really comes down to one main issue. We have zero clue what Pete Carroll is going to do. We don't know how much Zach Charbonnet will eat into Kenneth Walker's workload. It's very possible that Walker retains the bulk of the work out of the backfield and that we're panicked for no reason. I'm not even opposed to drafting a committee back if we know exactly what the split will be and if there's legitimate upside at the right ADP. But RB17 is the wrong ADP in a split that could be very ugly. To make matters worse, Walker is dealing with a groin injury, and again, with Pete Carroll, there is no actual timeline on when Walker will be available. And while it's unlikely that this actually lingers into the season, Walker's absence is giving Charbonnet valuable reps and time to show off his capabilities in the context of a lead back. We don't need confusion and ambiguity in this backfield. We can't afford to draft Walker with lack of clarity around his workload. Let's talk about a player with a very defined workload, but one that we should still be avoiding: Joe Mixon. Mixon is locked in as the Bengals' RB1, and at his ADP of RB15, he is a low-risk draft pick at first glance. But that RB15 ADP is a little bit misleading. That ADP was very related to how we viewed him before his contract adjustment when he was at risk of being cut. Mixon's ADP should rise over the next couple of weeks, and RB10 is more than likely his true draft position. And when we look at all the other running backs in the top 15, Mixon's upside and efficiency just pales in comparison. Mixon finished as RB10 in PPR and RB8 in average points per game, averaging 16 fantasy points, but when you dig into the numbers, that's where things start to get a bit concerning. Mixon's efficiency was absolutely horrendous, and his fantasy points were aggressively propped up by his Week 9 performance against Carolina. You know the one. Mixon had 22 carries for 153 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, and 4 receptions for 58 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Things do start to get a little bit messy when you start excluding games for certain players and not others, but with Mixon, this was truly an outlier performance, and no other game came even relatively close to that type of production. When you look at the statistics outside of that game, Mixon had a total of 3 rushing touchdowns over the course of 14 games. And touchdowns weren't the only issue. Mixon averaged 58 rushing yards per game and 3.9 yards per carry. Mixon's saving grace is volume and receptions, and that's enough to make him okay. But there's a lot of indicators here that Mixon just might have lost a step. Mixon is being drafted in an area where you're better off drafting a receiver or a high-end quarterback rather than investing in a back who will give you a few top 12 games and a bunch of mediocrity. Moving on to another high ADP back with concerns, let's talk about Breece Hall. To preface this, my aversion to Breece Hall is very unlike that of Joe Mixon. Players coming off of ACL injuries are just very risky, and that's a huge concern here. A healthy Breece Hall is a top 10 back all day, but he's not healthy. If fantasy managers get more comfortable with acknowledging that he's not as far along in his recovery as we had hoped, and Hall's ADP finally comes down a little bit, I'd probably remove him from this list. But ultimately, ADP is the only real issue that I have here. Hall is being drafted on the cusp of an RB1 coming off a significant injury, and we all know that his upside is unbelievable. But that's just way too high for a guy who could have a limited role through the beginning portions of the season, if he's even available to start the season. The Jets have been in talks with Dalvin Cook, and it sounds like the only thing keeping this deal from happening is Dalvin's contract requirements. Even if Cook isn't signed, that is a clear indication that Hall's early season availability and workload is in question. Again, if they sign Cook or another back, Hall's ADP could come down, making him worth a pick. But if the Jets opt to use in-house backs while Hall recovers, Hall's ADP is going to stay right where it is. You cannot draft him at his current ADP. Let's move on from RB13 in ADP to RB12, Travis Etienne. I would love nothing more than for Travis Etienne to have a true RB1 season and thrive. There is not a fantasy analyst out there that loves Clemson alumni more than me, but I just can't get comfortable with drafting Etienne as a top 12 back. You might have seen the recent news that Doug Peterson wants Etienne to have 1,600 to 1,700 rushing yards, but technically that is not what he said. The Jags haven't said they're giving Etienne more volume. They've really said the opposite all offseason. What Peterson recently said is that if Etienne makes adjustments, he can push 1,600 yards. He is capable. That is not what they're giving him. That's a big difference. Aside from the possibility of Tank Bigsby's involvement, Etienne had just 5 rushing touchdowns last year. Yards are fine, But for our fantasy purposes, we need a big uptick in touchdowns, and we also need more production through the air. And that will be difficult for him to make those kind of big leaps in touchdowns and receptions when the Jags have returned all of their offensive weapons and added Calvin Ridley, narrowing opportunities even further. By no means do I think that Etienne will be a bust, but he just doesn't have the upside that we are truly looking for. And my final running back to avoid is Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is another back that I am fine with drafting if his ADP drops. Again, this is not a full-blown fade, because even though there are some fears around Taylor's status for the year with contract issues with Jim Irsay, I do think that Taylor will suit up for week 1. But going down the list of top backs, Jonathan Taylor easily has the shakiest situation. Outside of Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor is the only running back being drafted in the top 10 that has to contend with a true rushing quarterback. You can be successful with a rushing quarterback, but the fact that this is a rookie situation is what makes this so shaky. Anthony Richardson's best attributes are his legs, and he might be overly reliant on them. Jonathan Taylor's RB1 season included 18 rushing touchdowns. I just don't see that happening within this offense. If his ADP continues to dip to the point where you can grab him in the late second round, I would absolutely take that. But if you were drafting him over more stable backs like Nick Chubb or Derrick Henry or high-end wide receivers like A.J. Brown or Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would advise against it. Again, he is the top 10 back with the most difficult road ahead of him. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to FantasyPros. And remember, if you want a chance to win a 1-of-1 Ultimate Custom Fantasy Championship belt for your league, courtesy of Trophy Smack, the #1 destination for epic fantasy tournament trophies, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize.